So before I start this session, one quick question. How many of you guys have worked on a monolithic to microservice migration kind of a project? You can just raise your hand. So yep, that's good. That's good. Good to see a good number. So let's start with the first part where we'll try to establish the challenge. Okay. So let's go on to the monolithic pain point areas, right? So monolithic, when we deal about monolithic, yeah, it's like a huge code base that you're dealing with. And all of a sudden, if you make a small change, then everything is at risk, right? You make a small change to the library and suddenly everything is at risk. And one small mistake, life is hell, right? So especially if you're doing something on a Friday, when your brains are usually going into that weekend mode, and then you have to deal with this kind of chaos, definitely the pain is evident, right? That's what the monolithic is all about, right? So let's go to see some other areas, like if you have to deploy any new features related to your business, that will definitely be hampering the overall communication and how it works, right? So the business opportunities definitely gets hampered. Then again, if you are to this with monolithic code base, one of the main problems is having the long builds, and the testing requires extensively, which is also again slow and thereby impacting the business. Think for a moment that your competitor on the other hand is having the microservice advantage, right? That's where he will always have an upper edge compared to you, right? So that's where it will limit your global reach and stuff like that. So that's on the monolithic pain points. Now let's come and see the microservice. The microservice, on the other hand, is you will have isolated services running independently, which can be built, tested, and deployed, right? So life is much easier. You can build things quickly, test it, deploy the individual service without worrying whether the other parts will make. Even if you have to make change, you will make change on that service. Nothing gets impacted, right? So definitely that helps you to have faster release cycles and definitely an edge over the business, right? So now let's go to the next part. So let's quickly try to establish and see what is the market perspective on microservice adoption. This is a report. This is a quick survey done by Gartner, wherein they have tried to interview a small batch of C-level executives, and you can quickly see that approx 39% of them feel that they want to go to microservice in the next 6 months, right? And definitely the reason for it is the agility, the deployment speed, adherence to the CI/CD process, so on and so forth. This will definitely make their life much easier and help them to establish their business not only within the particular local area, also expand the market also, right? So that's what it says. Now, before we go to the GenAI approach, let me take you through a hypothetical situation, and where we will try to see and feel the pain together for the monolithic for the traditional approach, right? Let's assume that there is a e-commerce setup, right, which is currently running a huge monolithic code base, and you as a developer have been given a task of extracting this into microservices. Let's try to take a small example that we will try to extract one, that is an inventory tracking system out of this huge monolithic code base. That's what the target is as a developer, right? So when you have to do this kind of a thing, right, when you have to execute this kind of a project, it will be definitely, we'll try and see how this can be done and how painful it could be. The most important thing is the requirement decomposition part, right, where you need to understand the huge monolithic code base, identify the dependencies, and also understand what is the business logic for the inventory tracking system, right? Once you have that understanding, you also need to understand how the different components like the inventory tracking, order processing, it could be your payment gateway, shipping, these are most closely tied to the inventory tracking system, right? How this all work together. Now, first few days as a developer, when you do the traditional way, first few days will be completely occupied in doing this transaction for you to understand this, right? And suppose there is no documentation. If there is no documentation part, your life is more difficult, right, for this kind of thing. Now, somehow, if you somehow could figure that part out, the next most important thing is the service extraction. We'll go to the refactoring of the code. When we say about the refactoring of the code, the most important thing for you is to understand how this new microservice, that the inventory tracking, can be segregated from the huge monolithic code base. For that, again, you need to have niche expertise. If you have niche expertise of identifying them, understanding how the data flows or how the communication pattern is there, then you can make things easier. And somehow, if you don't have that expertise, it will again take next couple of days for you to figure out that part. And then you have to again do the service extraction part. Now, somehow, if you could figure these two stages, right, which is all of a sudden, going to be difficult, considering that you have to do manually, and there is no documentation available. And again, the next part, most important part, also will be the testing part, right, wherein you need to understand what should be the test case strategy first for this kind of exercise, where you need to isolate your one microservice and then test it to see that this isolated microservice works in conjunction with the other monolithic parts, right? So the unit testing part, then the integration testing part, and stuff like that. You have to figure out that, then also devise a mechanism to have the right code in place to do those kind of testing. So and then definitely you will do the deployment and stuff like that, and test it out and stuff like that. So in this whole process, just for this small thing, you will take approx around 14 days of time. And this is a hypothetical situation, so I will just say that you will require 14 days of time to do this everything manually. And in this process, definitely you will go through multiple feedbacks, multiple iterations will be there, and more learning will be there, and that's how you will proceed, right? Now, this is where GenAI can act as a modernization catalyst. The whole idea is, we are not saying that GenAI is any kind of magic, but it definitely offers targeted assistance where life becomes difficult, right? That's what we are trying to say. And how it can make life easy is, it will help you to identify those domain entities, how those domain entities can be separated, how the microservice extraction can be done. And this we will see in the next step, later, going into more detail of how these things can be achieved. So this is where GenAI can help you. And even, as I said, devising the test case strategy is not going to be easy, right? Every service will have its unique test case strategy. And if you can have something like a GenAI tool, which can not only guide you in what the test case strategy should be, but also what should be the code around it, your life as a developer becomes much easier. Do we agree on that? Yep, perfect. So let's go and see. So once that part is covered, definitely the pragmatic opportunity is to, you can release the business who has these microservices can release their features more extensively. They can take inputs from the customers. The feedback loop will be much faster, and they will be able to capture the market more efficiently, is what the opportunity lies. Okay. Now, let's try to see the approach. Let's see our approach with the GenAI solution, right? Now, just to connect the dots, we have just seen in a traditional approach, if you have to extract one microservice, that is the inventory tracking service, out of the huge monolithic code base, it would take approx around 14 days, right? Now, let's see when we use something like GenAI tools, okay, and how life can be much easier. So this is the same example. We are trying to extract the inventory tracking service from this huge monolithic code base using some tools, right? So the first thing that we saw is, during the requirement decomposition part, in the traditional approach, we saw that it was really difficult, because you need to identify the business logic of the inventory tracking system. Then also you need to identify the dependencies. For example, how inventory tracking system is dependent on probably your shipping services, order processing service, or payment gateway service. How these all are tightly coupled at the end of the day, right? So you need to understand those dependencies, and also how the system talks to each other component, because at the end it has to work in a very cooperative and conjunction manner, right, for it to function. Now, let's see with the GenAI tool. Now, let's focus on the requirement decomposition part. So, in this requirement decomposition part, let's say that you have a GenAI tool like vfunction. Okay, this is a very useful thing. I will suggest you just go and see in the AWS marketplace. You have something like a vfunction, which can help you in the requirement decomposition, right? So the next obvious question is, how is that possible? How is it possible for vfunction to help you with the identifying the domain entities, right? That's an obvious question. So vfunction uses something like a code clustering and dependency analysis technique, via which it identifies the logical boundaries from the huge monolithic code base, which aligns to your business domain. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? So what I mean by this is like, the moment you can connect your V function to your code repository, okay, and it can take any role. For example, in this case, it will take as a developer role, okay. So you connect your V function as a developer to a code base. It can analyze the complete code base, and then it can understand that certain classes or modules from this huge monolithic code base is tied to the inventory tracking logic, while other certain classes or modules from the huge monolithic code base is tied to order shipping, or the others could be tied to payment gateway processing. So in this way, it can identify what are the domain entities, right? So it will give you clearly, okay, these classes and modules are linked to inventory, these classes and modules are linked to order processing, so on and so forth. That's where it can help, right? Now, we also saw that this took a couple of days in the traditional way, but we using these tools can make your life much easier. Even if you don't have documentation, you don't need to worry, right? The GenAI tool here does most of the work, right? Now let's go to the next part. The next most difficult part is the service extraction, right? Service extraction is like we are moving the inventory logic out of this huge monolithic code base to its own microservice. This is also where the GenAI tool can extensively help. And how will it do it, right? It runs an algorithm which helps you to identify the communication patterns. It also helps you to identify what are the dependencies, what are the data flows, and the integration points. Thereby, it can help you to logically separate this inventory system logic from your huge monolithic code base, right? So once that is done, you can put your inventory system logic at a separate microservice moving out from the monolithic code base. So that's where, again, it can be extensively helpful. We also saw that, this is where the code suggestions and the recommendations part will come out, right? Now we saw another thing, one of the most difficult part is definitely the testing part, okay? Testing part we saw in the traditional approach, you have to manually figure out what would be the test case strategy, what would be the code behind it and stuff like that. Now, just think for a moment, you have a GenAI tool, right? Which understands your code, the contextual meaning of the code, and figures out what should be the best test case strategy for you, right? Isn't life much easier with this kind of a scenario as a developer when you have something prominent like that, right? It can help you. So for example, let's come up to this inventory system. So what could be ideally the test logic scenarios? It could be like the unit testing part where you have to first understand how the test inventory logic works, like adding, removing, or updating any products, right? And also handling edge case scenarios like out of stock, which we always see. We all use Amazon, Myntra, Flipkart, and other things like that. There's a separate logic when the stock is not available, right? Also, once that part is done, the integration testing part. Now, since you're moving the inventory tracking logic completely out of this huge monolithic code base, this needs to work in conjunction with this, right? It cannot work independently because there's still a task to move other services also from this. So that's where, again, this integration testing can be helpful with the GenAI tool. So when we use all these tools in an efficient manner, as we saw in the traditional approach, we required 14 days, right, to do this task. And here, with the help of these tools, our lives can be much easier and we can reduce it to 7 days of time. Now, when I say this, we can reduce it to 7 days of time. This definitely ensures that the speed definitely has increased for the feature delivery. At the same time, the predictable quality is definitely maintained. That's going to be crucial, right? And also, with this kind of a setup, you can always reduce the seniority index. For a traditional approach, you need to have real senior guys who have extensively worked on it. Now, here you can reduce it. Probably one senior guy and can work with other multiple junior team members and still carry out giving the same efficiency, right? And definitely decreasing in the engineer onboarding time. So this is how it can make the things really useful using GenAI tool. Now we will go and see a demo also at the end, what I'm talking about. And at the same time, I will try to go a little bit deeper onto how this becomes technically feasible, okay? Now let's try to go to the next part. Now this will address the how part of it, the how this is technically possible, right? That's going to be crucial here. So let's quickly see. Before that, let me first quickly take you to the role-based channels. What are role-based channels? These are nothing but your code repository. It could be your Visual Studio Code. It could be your messengers or task tracking like Jira, Confluence for requirement gathering, and knowledge management system, right? We'll see a demo specifically on this, so I will focus on that same example, right? Now let's see what are going to be the agent fleets, right? Agent fleets are nothing but your assistants. These agent fleets are nothing but your assistants who can take on a multiple personality role. For example, as a developer, it can take a AI developer assistant role, which will be equipped with the coding, and it can do some tasks for you, making life easy, right? Similarly, as a business analyst assistant, it will be equipped with the business analyst role, and it can help you with probably user story creation and stuff like that. We'll see that in demo, right? Now let's connect back to the dot. We saw that like if you have millions of lines of code and you have a stringent timeline, right, within which you have to execute that, right? So this is where your custom workflow or agents can help, right? As long as your assistants can connect to the underlying tools and do the task, your life is easy. This is where we bring in our EPAM AI run tool, that is CodeLET and CodeMe. I will extensively show a demo on CodeMe on the same, right? So, so far it's clear. Now let's try to take an example here, right? So, suppose let's take an example of an AI developer assistant, right? Which is trying to connect to your code repository and bringing some kind of intelligence, right? It is giving you some kind of recommendation, so on and so forth. Now, how is this possible? How under the hood this becomes possible? Let's try to go one step deeper. So what exactly happens is, as long as your AI developer assistant is able to integrate, when I say integrate, means it is able to connect to the code repository via some authentication mechanism, it can do the task. So let's give this hypothetical situation wherever you have a code base and you need help from the AI developer assistant. So what it does is it integrates with your code repository, and behind the hood, the code is nothing but a text, right? It converts those texts into tokens. This is the step one, okay? And that's how LLM will understand it. For the LLM to understand the codes needs to first convert it into tokens or chunks. This is the step one. The step two is these tokens or chunks are then converted into dense vectors using embedding models. Just check Hugging Face libraries. If you check Hugging Face libraries, you will find a lot of embedding models which can be used for storing this kind of, converting this into dense vectors. Once this dense vector is converted into dense vector, then it stores this into, store this embeddings into a vector index. When I say this, it means LLM now is in a position to make the contextual, the high quality contextual meaning out of the code. That's what exactly it means, right? So once it understands that high quality contextual meaning, that's when it can offer all kind of recommendations and stuff like that, right? So for it to understand this, it's very important that it understands the logic and stuff like that. Fair enough. So, and at the end, it will make all as an API call, right? So everything will be an API call to your LLM providers. So at the end, for you this to work, it has to make an API call to the LLM providers. It can be your OpenAI or Google. It could be your OpenAI models like GPT-4o. GPT-4.1 has recently been released, which has 1 million tokens, right? So that's how it works. Now let's quickly go on to our demo side. So in short, what we are trying to say is, like, you continue to work where you are, and post this AI developer assistant integrates with your code, we will continue from there. And that's where the life becomes easy, right? Now, before I start with the demo, let me quickly take you through this. This is how the look and feel of CodeMe is. We'll quickly cover what is integration. As we saw that, let me take an example here. This is one of the assistant, right? Which is a business analyst assistant, which will help you with creating user stories, right? For you. Now, for it to do this, it has to integrate now, right? Integrate means it has to connect to your Jira, which will require an authentication mechanism. So if you see here, this is the business analyst agent, which uses the Jira integration, means the authentication mechanism to connect to Jira, and that's when it can do its task. Similarly, we'll try to come to the problem statement that we will see in the demo. Okay. Now let's try to go and do that. But before that, one quick thing that I would like to say here is the problem statement that we are trying to solve is we will try to add a UX enhancement. Okay, this is nothing but I will add a ticket which says a UX enhancement feature, which will remove some kind of a sidebar link and add a logout button. That's what we are trying to do. The whole idea here is, if you are to do it, the first thing is definitely to have a release manager assistant who will guide you in creating the first release. Then we'll create a ticket, Jira ticket, using a BI analyst assistant, which will create that ticket, link it to the Jira release. And then, as I mentioned, AI developer assistant, which can help you execute that ticket, right? So the first part here is to have this release manager assistant and create the release. Okay, so if you see, we are using this release manager assistant. And I'm saying that to create a product release, right? So the moment I say it, it uses the integration to connect with the Jira. And then if you see here, you can see the product 0.11.1 release created, right? So this is the first part of it. Now the second part is to create a ticket, right? We have the release in place. Now I am asking the business analyst assistant to create a ticket out of this. So if you see it, it helps you to create that ticket. And then also it will ask you to confirm if all the information is correct. Once you say confirm, then it will go further and create this ticket on your behalf. So when this happens at the back end, everything is like an agent. It will use a chain of thoughts. That's an iterative thought process until unless it gets the work done. That's how it works in the background. So you can see it has confirmed that, like, this ticket for UX enhancement has successfully created. And now I ask it to add it to the product 0.11.1 release, right? So the release was created, the ticket was created, the ticket is now getting attached to the release. Now I go to the release and in Jira, and now when I can see this UX enhancement admin link being created. And also the other thing, if you see here, it is having the labels that is AI generated, right? So that means this was done by the AI and this was not done manually. This is the demo part of how this is happening. This is example of a very small demo because of the stringent timeline, right? We cannot give you the whole demo of how this can be done. I'm just taking a very small piece and how GenAI can help, right? I would have loved to take on the V-function demo, but because of a very stringent 30 minutes deadline, it's not possible. So that's why we are trying to cover a very small part, right? So we're trying to use now a developer assistant, and we are trying to implement this ticket, right? So the moment I do this, the developer assistant again connects to your one of the code repositories and try to, as a developer, definitely you will have to execute some tickets, right? This is where it is coming helpful. So it is running this commands, it is using this chain of thoughts. And also if you see, it's trying to write file to file system. And also it will now try to push the change, commit the change and push the change, right? And then we can Yes, sir. Right. So for that you have to use something like a V function, which will give you the right identification and stuff like that. So I'll just recommend that please go and check AWS Marketplace. V function will give, but that's a very huge topic which cannot be covered. But I will quickly encourage you to see that, right? Yes, sir. Right. No, but it also, see, as you rightly mentioned, the data part is going to be very critical. That's where it will analyze those dependencies, understand what are the data flow dependencies, and also understand how these things work. So it cannot be just code first. Without the data dependencies, that will not make sense, right? It will also handle, but the V function can help you. This is like a separate GenAI tool, which will identify all those dependencies, and as a UI, it will give you all those information. So I'll again request you just check that. That will give you a lot more idea. So here, if you see, it has pushed this changes as into the GitHub code repository. Now it is trying to, this was the change that was done by the CodeMe tool here. And If you see here, it is the pipeline is currently pending to see if it is valid or not, and then it will completely execute it. So that's how it works, right? Thank you.